Welcome to Unit 3 in our Modern Latin American History class. In this unit, we're going to be exploring the themes of order and progress, as well as the theme of neocolonialism. So this section of the class will take us from the mid-19th century in terms of chronology to just about the end of that century or the early 20th century. So we're going to be thinking about what we mean and what Chasteen means when he talks about the terms order and progress with a capital P, as he puts it. In general, order and progress have a lot to do with ideas about liberalism and modernization. So think about what we mean when we talk about 19th century liberalism. In the last unit, we saw the ways in which liberals sort of led the charge for independence, but were then pretty quickly displaced by conservative caudillos as the leaders in their various nations. So, for example, we had Juan Manuel Rosas in Argentina, who was a main caudillo. In Paraguay, we had Dr. Francia, who we didn't study in a lot of detail, but who played a very important and sort of unique role in putting Paraguay on a course for independence. As far as nation building went, Paraguay was one of the strongest in the early post-independence period due to his leadership, although in many ways he was still a typical caudillo. As we'll see in this unit, however, those who followed him, it was a father and a son, the Lozanos, they put Paraguay on a very different kind of course. They got into a war in the La Plata region with Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil that cost Paraguay very dearly, the War of the Triple Alliance. One of the optional readings goes into detail in that war. However, Chasteen does discuss it because it plays an important role as a turning point in this age of kind of liberal resurgence. So again, as you work through this unit, think about what liberalism meant in 19th century Latin America and why liberal political ideals were so connected with the drive for modernization. The drive for modernization is something that allowed European powers, especially Great Britain, and then toward the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the United States, to play an ever-increasing role in the economic and political life of Latin American nations. So some of the reasons that Latin American liberals sort of looked to Britain and the United States is that they were the places that had modern technology. They had telegraphs, they had railroads, they were on the cutting edge of those kinds of things, and in order to kind of enter what we now think of sometimes as the First World or the Global North, Latin American liberals sold out a lot. I mean, they paid some pretty big prices to try to get modern technologies into their nations. Some of them even went so far as to attempt to whiten their populations through immigration from Europe or from the United States. Less so from the United States, more so from Europe. So again, think about why those choices were made and how those choices impacted the vast majority of the populations in Latin American nations. So across the region, most of the people were still of mestizo or indigenous background or African background. How were they impacted by scientific racism that came along with the drive for modernization? There was a lot of good that came with modernization. As we know, we often think of progress as a positive term, but something as we read along here that we need to keep in mind is what was the downside? How did it impact people who weren't benefiting directly from that? I think one of the best cases of this is the story of Canudos in Brazil, the story of Antonio Consigliero, who you'll read about in the Levine article. Also, please click on the link to the blog post on the case of Tomochic in northwestern Chihuahua. It took place almost at the same time, just a little bit earlier than the case of Canudos, and there were a lot of similarities in what happened at Tomochic with rural peasants there attempting to deal with the changes of modernization, the increasing power of the Mexican state, and then thinking about why both the Mexican and the Brazilian state, in each of these cases, decided to very violently crush what seemed to be pretty minor rebellions of rural folk in the hinterlands of both of those nations. So again, why did this drive for progress create these very heavy-handed kinds of reactions on the part of the leadership, the governments, or the states of both Mexico and Brazil? And what does that tell us about the increasing role of neocolonialism and, again, what was going on in Latin America as a whole? So hopefully what I've done here in this intro is just given you some very broad ideas to think about that should help you to unite all of the different events that we'll be reading about in Chasteen and Wood and Levine. And please do give that blog post a look. It's pretty brief, and it will give you a point of comparison to the Canudos case. I hope you enjoy Unit 3.